Apparently my dog can't shut the fuck up for 5 seconds.
This week's show brought to you by... Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks Show. Sincerest apologies about last week. Our producer, Brian, inexplicably called in sick on Monday. I think you got what was coming to you there, Brian. The only loss in the series of the Warriors against the Rockets happened to coincide with you having to, miss work to see a game. I actually ended up with a double ear infection all of last week, so apologies there was no show last week, but we're back with a vengeance. The Boxscore Geeks Show. I'm Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. New channel. We're on Twitch. With me, as always, we got the original NBA geek himself, Patrick Minton, who you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. Say hey, Patrick.
Hey, Patrick.
And I see you found your glass. You were talking about that pre-show, so I'm glad. Yeah. I'm glad we keep the geek up. And then last but not least, we have our producer, the voice of God, who's on camera, Brian Foster. Give a shout out, Brian.
Oh, what's up, guys? Yeah, I have been watching some playoff basketball. I've even got my Warriors 2015 playoff shirt on tonight. And, yeah, boy, it's exciting. We're going to talk some basketball. And, here's one thing I'll say about Twitch, though. We're trying it live. It's a better live streaming platform. The VODs will still be on the same Nerd Numbers channel on YouTube. And, of course, all those other great sources like iTunes. So
since we're on Twitch, I kind of feel like we should be playing StarCraft or something.
Okay.
Uh-oh. Dre's doing it live.
Oh my gosh, he's got a WrestleMania chair. I can't hear him at all, but...
He's come back with the Legend of Zelda. Now we're officially Twitch. There we go.
Zelda 2 map, which, and I can tell you the number of keys you can end up with at the end of this game is O, because it counts in numbers. I'm proud that I found that. I'll put a link to it in the post. All right. Anyway, on to the show. We got 3 major subjects we're going to talk. We're going to let Brian wax effusive about the Warriors versus the Rockets and how they're going to smack down the Cavaliers. We're going to talk a little bit about actually players getting smacked down in the playoffs for incorrect reasons. Then we're going to wrap up with me talking about how LeBron is amazing. Patrick, you may or may not agree. And we may actually tease some subjects that we'll get to in the offseason, and that'll be our show. So, Brian... let's get to the Rockets. You were watching closely. The Warriors, they're at the 72-win Bulls at this point, where the 72-win Bulls only lost 3 games in the playoffs. I believe the Warriors at the same level. So if they sweep the finals, they'll be just like the 72-win Bulls. What are your thoughts on that and how they handled the Rockets?
Yeah, they just keep showing everyone that they're, at least statistically speaking, which is what we like to talk about on this show, that they're one of the top 10 teams of all time, and they're continuing to play like that in the playoffs. We got some nice highlights here on NBA.com, and we'll look at the numbers too. But, yeah, that's how we're going to start off the show. I know it was a few days ago, but just kind of the box score side of this game that brought the Warriors into the finals. And, yeah, it was an impressive win. So first off, the complaint we've always had about the Warriors, and again, we're nitpicking, right? Nitpicking about a top 10 team, but when we did our...
Number 2 in the league on offense, number 1 in the league on defense.
That's right.
There's only so much you can yell at them for.
When we did our show back earlier in the season, when they were kind of the surprise, established themselves as the number 1 team, we said, why did this happen? What were their strengths and weaknesses? And the conclusion I came to anyway at that time, and you guys I think agreed with me, was that, well, even though they're playing this small lineup, their smalls are getting all the big stats. That, Draymond Green, he's only 6'6", but he rebounds like a power forward. So they out-rebounded the Rockets by 20 in this game, and that was a big part of it.
That was with Dwight Howard actually pulling down some boards.
That's right. So Dwight Howard had an interesting game. I've got the box score up right now, actually. And he, I didn't share with you guys on Skype, but you can probably follow along on Twitch. It's a lot more up-to-date. But, yeah, he had a pretty poor offensive game, but he still had 16 rebounds and 4 blocks. So, they do let big men run wild on them occasionally, but overall, if you look at the team stats, yeah, they play big with this small lineup, and I think that's kind of deceptive to guys like Charles Barkley and all the other haters who still don't think they're going to beat the Cavs.
Isn't it ironic that Barkley is a hater in this? This is a guy who's like, I don't know, he's like he's 6'7" on a good day. And
he's not even close. He's like 6'4". He was
I know.
Never,
I'm just saying, like, he was the prototype for a guy who's not that big and yet played a power forward and dominated at the position because it doesn't matter how tall you are as long as you do the things you're supposed to do. Does it matter if you had to jump higher to get the rebound than the guy who's 6'10"? No,
absolutely. Rebound, right? And that's what's so funny is that if you look at Draymond Green, like who is his biggest historical comparison? It is a guy like Barkley. They're the same height. They're kind of broad and burly, similar personalities. Smart, entertaining guys that talk a lot of trash. It's a really it's funny that he's just not getting it because they're doing the same thing he did.
And what's even ironic is that, usually people's go-to on things like that is that, oh, sure, he gets rebounds and stuff, but he can't defend against other big men because he doesn't have the length or whatever, which is crazy because, Draymond Green clearly can defend, as evidenced by the fact that he got multiple votes for Defensive Player of the Year.
He was robbed. Can we just admit he was flat out robbed? Love Kawhi. Draymond Green should have been Defensive Player of the Year.
And he compared himself to Al Gore.
Right? Are we in agreement that it really just comes down to minutes played?
Yeah, I mean, well, you can't grade a player on the minutes they didn't play.
Well, sure, but Kawhi did play 2,000 minutes, right? And where's your threshold? Because if I was gonna say the threshold is 1,500 minutes, then I'm shaking Rudy Gobert's hand and giving him the award, right?
Oh, that is.
I mean, it's not fair to a player to say, oh, well, you didn't win it because you didn't play all these games. And well, is it Rudy Gobert's fault that it took his coaches forever to realize how good he was and insert him into the lineup and trade Enes Kanter away? I don't think it necessarily is, and I don't think Gobert's. I don't think it can all be attributed to Gobert going from I didn't know anything to I suddenly am the best defensive center in the NBA in a 4-month span. It wasn't all just him learning how to play. A lot of it was coaches just not giving him the time, right? And also, I don't think you can fault Kawhi Leonard for breaking his hand either. So, but again, I have no problem with somebody who says since Draymond Green played more minutes, he deserves it because he does a fantastic job at the position he plays. But the point I'm trying to make, though, is that, even the popular consensus is that he's not any worse of a defender as a taller power forward would be. So I don't understand why there's any question about, Draymond Green is a really good power forward, period. End of sentence. Why do we keep talking about his height or the fact that he shoots threes? Doesn't seem relevant to me.
Well, Brian, I thought Brian was going to hop in a few times. He didn't there. One other thing I'll give you about this series that made me happy is I really would have liked to see the Clippers advance. There's lots of reasons. They're in a big market. They're a fantastic team. I've been a Chris Paul fan forever. Didn't happen. But one of the annoying things was Josh Smith had one good game or two good games to end that series out. And I was going to have to hear what a brilliant freaking maneuver Josh Smith was. And even Josh Smith outperformed what I expected, and I still don't think he was a good move. I still don't think letting Tarek Black go, or however you say his first name, I apologize, I'm getting the pronunciation wrong. I still don't think letting a young player go on a nothing contract to hope that Josh Smith doesn't shoot you out of the game on your team, and then thankfully against the Warriors, Josh Smith, shot him out of a game. So I'm glad that was the exclamation point on Josh Smith's playoff career with the Rockets, because I didn't want to have to hear in the offseason how brilliant of a move Josh Smith was when it's clear it was, very regression to the mean. He has some games where he'll shoot you out of it. He'll have some games where he keeps you in it.
I think we should start a podcast pool on who will overpay for Josh Smith's services next year.
Yeah, and that was a big bullet point on my list. He was brutal in this series.
In fact, if only because of Game 5 against the Clippers,
Game 5, 6, and 7, he all played really well.
Right, but there was one game where he went 6 for 6 in the fourth quarter or something ridiculous. Right, he had 15 to 20 points in the fourth quarter. I think that was Game 5 when they were down. But
Patrick, here's the crime of it all: is he went 3 for 14 shooting in that closeout game and just killed the Rockets, as he did in several other games against the Warriors. But that was the most shots anyone on the team took. Howard only had 13.
Very typical of a Josh Smith game. Yeah.
Harden only had 11. And I want to say he was up there in some of the other games too. I don't have it up right now, but if he's your number one option when you have two of the most efficient scorers in the league, other guys like Ariza and Prigioni that are efficient, that's crazy to let him take that many shots.
So let's be fair. In this particular game, James Harden was not any better.
That's true.
James Harden had so few shot attempts because he kept giving the ball away before he could shoot. I mean,
That's
that's pretty insane.
More turnovers than shot attempts is very impressive. What?
Absolutely, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it, and I feel bad for him because he set the record for most turnovers in a playoff game, and I think he also owns like the number 3 spot from 2011 or 12.
Here's a question to you, because Cuban at the start of the playoffs came out and said the Rockets aren't a very good team. They're pretty boring. Now, the obvious problem they had is the Mavericks didn't have the team to come at the Rockets and do anything about that. Now, the Warriors, though, #1 defense in the league. They've got, Draymond Green, who's a cheat code. We were talking about size. The irony is it's the other way. If he can play big, play like a power forward, but has the size of a small forward and can also go out to the perimeter, that's a cheat code. Whereas, other bigs, if you draw them away from the rim, it hurts you because they're not going to defend you on the perimeter, and now they're away from the rim. Draymond Green doesn't have that disadvantage. So is this a case of Mark Cuban being right, of the Rockets not actually having that creative of an offense and the #1 defense in the league being able to dismantle them in a key game, especially when Josh Smith isn't there to bail them out with, his BS. If Josh Smith is on, there's nothing you're going to do. It's like I've seen Kobe games the same way.
I mean, the thing we all keep forgetting is that the Rockets didn't have Montejunas or Beverly, so they had two pretty key. They had key role players that couldn't play, right? And so it. I mean, they had Jason Terry at his age logging a lot of minutes, and Jason Terry actually played decently on the offensive end, even though we all know he can't play defense. I don't particularly find it surprising that the best defense in the NBA will dismantle a team that is kind of hurting like that. And then Dwight Howard tweaked his ankle in Game 1, I think. So, I mean, we can kind of discount his performance after that to some degree as well. I don't think you can read too much into how bad the Houston Rockets looked because they were playing the best team in the NBA, right? And
beat
I
up
personally
and
think
fatigued. 7 games against the
I personally think the Cavs are going to look really, really bad playing against them too. I think this is going to be a 4-1 series, mostly because there's going to be one game where LeBron James is just like, oh my god, I can't believe a human being can do that, and wins a game. But I cannot see this Cavs team with that offense doing very well against this really good defense of the Golden State Warriors. I mean, maybe I'll be wrong, but I think it's going to be a lopsided series.
I want to defend Dwight Howard too. He, playing injured and still getting all those rebounds and blocks and playing pretty good defense, getting beat up inside by the Warriors, and it's whatever. That's his job. He's supposed to do it. But I don't understand all the hate on social media saying, Howard blew it. This is his chance. This is his team. He should have done better. I don't think it was Howard's fault they lost, playing hurt like that.
I think Howard is always going to get that because he basically
his personality, maybe.
His personality. For other reasons, people don't like him, and so it becomes a very easy excuse to kind of rag on him, right?
And I wanna go with a few more. I'm just cribbing from your notes, Brian. I hope you don't mind me taking.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah,
but you made
so quiet, Brian.
Yeah, you made
what kind of a fan are you?
Well, he's the producer. I have respect because I'm actually watching along on Twitch. It's slightly lagged from where we're at.
That's why every time I say something, it takes you a second to respond to me.
Well, no, I'm saying I was watching it, and Brian does. I am impressed how quickly he'll get graphics up or a video up or whatever. But your 2 points, you basically said Curry didn't do a great job shooting either. But
in that game specifically.
The advantage Curry has, and we mentioned this, I think, Patrick, you were the one that said a few weeks back, like if you looked at why Curry went from good to great, no, not great to greater title. He went from great to greater this season.
Went from great to awesome.
Great to awesome. This season is, he was able to rebound, assist, steal. He still got free throws. It's like Curry has a really complete game. I think people don't realize just, despite how much he shoots, he still passes a lot. He can still rebound and such. And then you also, Brian, you're gonna make me feel happy forever. You mentioned that Kerr said that Iguodala reminds him of Scottie Pippen, and Iguodala as well filled up the box score. So those two things definitely help, right? If your shooters aren't on, like we were basically saying with Harden, being able to still fill up the box score with key things. And you mentioned one last point, which is interesting because we were talking small ball. You basically said, look, the other team's got Dwight Howard. We're not going to try and do small ball against Howard. They left Bogut and Ezeli in the game the whole game.
Yeah.
And yeah, Dwight Howard still was able to outperform those guys, but they didn't get any extra edge, right? They didn't get the George Karl discount of, oh, you're playing David Lee. Well, we'll play one fewer big and let your bigs just feast on us.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. All of my notes from this game are just a big pile of stuff from the box score that just wasn't adding up with the mainstream and comments on the game. Iguodala is a guy that definitely gets hated on around here, even amongst the fans.
Really?
Absolutely. Well, because yay points, right? He doesn't score 16, 18 points a game anymore. He scores
First
10
of all,
or
he's
less.
coming off the bench, so
Yeah.
how could he?
Well, he comes off the bench, so he must not be good, right? The coach would start him if he was good.
my God.
That's the fan logic, right? And, I'm being sarcastic, of course. If you're listening along and can't see me, because Iguodala is amazing. He was hurt early in the year. He was gimpy, but, man, he's been good in the playoffs. And last year is the same way. He stood up, him and Curry, pretty much on their own against the Clippers. So Iguodala is playing well.
This is why the Warriors are so good too. Is they have a lot of depth. Like, I mean, they have Iguodala and Livingston as two great guys off the bench, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to again go back to that show we did earlier in the year, the Big Warriors blowout show where we went in depth on all the stats. Yeah, I mean that was one of my concerns is before the season, Coach Nick comes out with all these hype videos. Man, the Warriors are running this crazy offense in the summer league. Steve Kerr's the real deal. He's going to be this super coach, right? There's hype around that, and it kind of just started coming true. He kept doing better and better and better, and just didn't make any missteps. And that was our concern on that show, right? Or at least mine anyway, is will he just play these smalls forever until they lose? And he's shown versatility. He did give David Lee minutes against Memphis when they needed more size. And he, like Dre said, he kept Ezeli in against the Rockets and made a point to say in the press conference that, look, I'll play big if I need to. So, yeah, Steve Kerr has a great roster, and he's used it well. He's really delivered.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, one of our goals, by the way, tonight, keeping you in the loop. We're not going to keep this show too long. So I'm going to say, let Patrick, you get one more note on the Warriors. Then Brian, you get one more note on the Warriors. Then we're going to go into sadder topics. So Patrick, anything left to say? Any exclamation point on this amazing team?
I have no exclamation points at this time.
All right. Brian, anything from you, the Warriors fan? You're in a Warriors shirt.
Sure. I'll just say the same thing for Bogut. His offense doesn't get a lot of credit, but he's been putting up a ton of rebounds in all these games too and is a great passer. So, yeah, I mean, Curry's getting all the credit and Clay as well. But, man, do those guys rebound and play defense for a small team. It's pretty impressive.
And the last note I'll actually give, and I've said this to anybody who listened on Twitter, I don't think people realize how freaking good this team is. This doesn't happen. This hasn't happened since the 92 Bulls. And those, by the way, the 92 Bulls with Horace Grant, Michael Jordan, and Scottie Pippen, they were kind of the last vestige of an old era because people talk about tanking in the NBA. It doesn't work. It doesn't work anymore. It used to. The 1984, 85, whatever draft that Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley came out, and that was the last draft where tanking worked, and they changed the rules after that. So that was the last vestige of that working. The NBA, the free agency landscape and such has changed since. So to put a team together this good with modern salary cap constraints, et cetera, it's something special, and I don't think people realize just how good this team is. All right. Okay.
Sorry, finally on that, just the reason we're saying this, people are new, is just the point margins, right? That's really what's impressive. They've kept this giant point margin that was going in the regular season. They've kept it going against these top teams in the playoffs. They're still winning games by 10-plus points.
Yeah. And on to kind of a depressing conference, because we keep bashing the Eastern Conference. And I've actually got kind of an issue here. And Patrick, you had a great rant, so I'm hoping you'll go on this. But there's something problematic in the Eastern Conference this season. And so the NBA is a star-driven league. We know this. It's basically what the fans want to see. We want to see star players playing other star players. It's why essentially Magic Johnson and Larry Bird revitalized the NBA in the 80s. It's what Michael Jordan did. And in the Eastern Conference this season, we had Kevin Love get injured by Kelly Olynyk, and Kevin Love, after the fact, claimed he thought it was intentional. We had Dellavedova hurt Kyle Korver. You said, Patrick, you watched the video, that it doesn't look like Dellavedova hurt Korver intentionally, but there are other video clips against, for instance, Taj Gibson and Al Horford, of Dellavedova playing very dirty, and these are top players in key games in the playoffs, and we're basically going, it's not, I'm kind of troubled by the fact that at least out east we have players that are playing dirty, and this actually has a risk to the product, right? No one wants to see the Cavaliers against the Warriors without Kevin Love. There's always going to be, I mean, let's be honest, even if Kevin Love was in there, the Warriors are still going to be the heavy favorites. They're still probably going to blow them out. They're actually going to make Kevin Love probably look silly. I would love to see that, actually. But the fact of the matter is, it's not good for the NBA to have players in there that do intentional hurt things. Bruce Bowen, for as much credit as he gets, it was not a good thing that, he basically hip checked Steve Nash and got Amari Stoudemire kicked out of the game. That's not a good thing for the NBA, and I'm a little troubled by the Eastern Conference this season in regards to that, especially with kind of weaker teams doing it.
I mean, I don't. So with regards to Dellavedova, I don't think he's really I don't think he's trying to hurt anybody. I do think he's a totally dirty player, but I mean, I think there are tons of those in the NBA, and I don't think he's probably any worse than any. Like, if you went around to NBA locker rooms and you asked people who are the dirty players, you're going to get a list of 20 to 30 names, and I'm sure he's on that list. But I don't think anyone in the NBA would single him out and say that he's any different. The things I'm looking at are like the play against Taj Gibson, where he's lying on the floor on his stomach, and rather than getting up like a normal person, hang on, let me rephrase. Rather than getting up like somebody who's a top tier athlete with supreme control over their own body would get up, he instead clamps his hind legs together over Taj Gibson's leg, and then so hard that when Gibson stands up, Dellavedova's body is actually lifted off the floor, which pretty much cannot happen unless you are intentionally using your legs to hold on to the other person. That just can't happen.
And then it looks to the refs like Taj Gibson kicked him from that, and they end up ejecting him for it.
Right, but I don't understand how they can look at that replay and come to that conclusion unless they're complete morons. I really don't understand how you can look at that replay and come to any conclusion other than that Dellavedova is being a douchebag in that particular scenario. It's really painfully obvious that he's using his legs. Nobody gets up that way. Nobody gets up off the floor that way, especially not when you're a Six Sigma athlete. You don't suddenly forget how to stand up. And again, I don't want to single him out because NBA players do this shit all the time. Anytime you see two players fall to the floor and get tangled up in the NBA, it is a virtual lock that at least one of them will try to get up like he's suddenly contracted MLS and he's flailing limbs everywhere and he doesn't know how to control his body and accidentally whack the other guy in the stomach. This shit happens every time two players in the NBA fall to the floor. And frankly, I think it's really disgusting that NBA referees that they put up with that shit. It's right next to the fact that if a player falls on the ground with the ball, suddenly it's a free-for-all. Suddenly it becomes not possible to foul the guy. You can literally just do the jump and dive on top of them and belly flop on top of them in an effort to get the ball. The referees will not call a foul once there's any kind of scrum on the floor. And it's well, if all the players know that, then people are just it becomes a rugby scrum, right? It becomes like a football scrum where at the bottom of that huddle, people are not being gentlemen, right? At the bottom of any fumble pile in football, talk to anybody who's played football. At the bottom of that pile, people are poking each other in the eye and pinching nipples and doing whatever the hell they can to get the football. And that's exactly what happens in the NBA when there's anytime there's a player on the floor with the ball. It's like a feeding frenzy. They all just flop on there like piranhas, and they get pretty dirty because they know refs aren't going to call any actual fouls there. And I mean, Dellavedova is the most recent guy we have on tape doing it, but I look at the referees and I look at that replay and I think, what the fuck game are you watching? Why aren't you just calling that for what it is. And until you do, players are going to keep doing that, and players are going to get hurt. That is the very simple fact of it.
Well, so actually, that transitions into the other two players I wanted to talk in the playoffs, because this is really interesting. Which is, I think the NBA, again, their product is their stars. They don't want their stars to get hurt, and I think we do have a major problem in the NBA. I know Paul Shirley talked about, you would think that these front offices would invest more in, say, trainers and medical staff, given the quality of the product, but they don't. Well, another example out west is Steph Curry took a major, he fell on his head, ended up leaving the game, ends up coming back in. Klay Thompson, I'm pretty sure Brian's got the knee to the head cued, but Klay Thompson gets kneed in the head, exits the game, comes back in. Now, in both of these cases, odds are they suffered concussive-like blow, might have concussive symptoms. Klay Thompson passed the test, but then after the fact, we discovered that he couldn't drive home, was vomiting, and did they did conclude he had a concussion.
How the hell did he pass the test?
Well, that's actually the point. It's kind of, you were saying the same thing with the refs.
And the answer is he lied. The answer to every question, he lied. That's how he passed the test.
So we've got two problems, which is well, actually, by the way, sorry to get back to that the test. There's a fantastic interview with CM Punk with Colt Cabana about him leaving the WWE. And he basically points out what he thinks that, despite the fact that WWE has claimed to be really concerned about concussions, in huge part because there's a guy named Chris Nowinski who has started a lot of the concussion research, and he's a former professional wrestler, that CM Punk basically came out and said he, knew he got a concussion. He says, I know I got a concussion. Everybody knows I got a concussion. They said, well, take the test just to verify. He takes the test. He, quote unquote, passes the test. And they go, well, you passed the test. He goes, well, then your test is garbage. Clearly, I got a concussion. And wow, I'm watching the play. Brian's got it cued, getting kneed in the head. Yeah, definitely. And there's a multi-part problem there, Patrick. So it's, on the one hand, the tests are probably garbage. Everybody wants the player back in. And the other thing, I think you said it right. We have a problem with a very macho culture in sports, in particular in the NBA, where you can't leave the game, right? It's a key game. It's a playoff game. I can't leave the game. Game's on the line. But at the same time, both the NBA, the coaching staff, whatever, should think product, right? And I mean, it would never go this far, but, in baseball, if it starts raining really heavily, they tarp the field and delay the game. And I don't know if we'd ever get to this point, but it's worth considering, like, if we acknowledge that there are certain players that are stars in the NBA, and everybody wants to see them play, if one of them gets a major injury and that maybe takes a couple hours to diagnose, then you just delay the game. Now, I doubt that'll ever happen, but let's just be honest. If you want long-term sustainability of your top athletes, you should be considering stuff like this. I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think anything's going to change. I honestly think it's somewhat troubling on both the East and West to see the culture basically allowing for the possibility of top players getting injured. And it not, as you're saying, like the dirty play, it's not uncommon, right? Even though I'm saying this is outrageous, you're going, yeah, you're just not watching hard enough. You're just seeing the most recent replay.
Yeah, and I think a lot of like the dirty play that I see Dellavedova doing is similar to what a lot of NBA players do, and it's not like I'm trying to injure people type of play. It's definitely like I'm trying to be like the biggest, most annoying douchebag pain in the ass I can possibly be to piss the other guy off kind of play, like that play against Taj Gibson, or, everyone who's played significant amount of basketball has played against that guy. There's that one guy who's, even when he's defending you 50 feet off of the ball, he's pinching your nipples, or he's squeezing your biceps, or he's holding your waistband, or doing some other bullshit that has like no real consequence on the actual play, but is just constantly pissing you off. And those are like the kind of players that that other players think are dirty. And those are also that's also the kind of play that leads to, like, you've got your hormones going crazy. You're like one of the most competitive people on earth, and you're all the juices are, all the adrenaline's flowing. It's not really that weird to eventually, like, the sixth time some dude pinches your nipple or like squeezes your legs in some weird way when he's getting up, that like no normal player would ever stand up that way. You're just like, eventually you lose it, and you just kind of shove the guy, or you tell the guy to fuck off, or whatever.
Or you elbow him like Al Horford, right? Like,
yeah, and I mean, I just feel like when stuff like that happens, I don't think the guys doing the instigating ever get nearly enough punishment for the instigations because let's face it, Al Horford doesn't just randomly swing his elbows at a guy because he's frustrated. That's not how it happened. Like everything we know about that player says, well, he probably had some kind of a reason to be really pissed off. And I don't think it's just because Kyle Korver went down recently. And if you look at that play with Al Horford, it's like, you know, normally when a player loses his balance, they fall down. They don't normally take like 8 steps backwards and fall down, especially when there's a guy like Dellavedova is falling backwards into Al Horford, who weighs like, what, 230 pounds. So for some reason, he's falling backwards and there's a 230-pound man behind him. Instead of that 230-pound man like helping him regain his balance and right him, he goes another 7 or 8 steps backwards and then eventually falls down. That's not how any person who's in the top 1% of athletes in the world would ever fall down. That's just not how physics works. That's not how human bodies work. It's just so weird. It seems very obvious that was a play where Horford was trying to get out of the way to let him fall down, and Dellavedova was like, well, I don't really want to fall down. I just want you and me together to fall down. So they kind of kept moving, and eventually it became too much. And I look at that play, and to me, it's a dirty play. It's not a I'm trying to hurt you dirty play. It's a I'm trying to be a huge pain in the ass type of dirty play.
But eventually that just boils over. So,
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, what I'll put as the exclamation point on this segment is I don't see anything changing. It's just worth considering that there are issues with the game being played, and, rest in peace, Short Corner Podcast. We'll see how many shows we have to go through without referencing them. I hope, forever, right? I hope we never stop referencing the Short Corner Podcast. I'm sorry, I'm cycling my camera here. It apparently went off. But, he mentioned that. He basically said he actually compared it to WWE, not in a good sense, for basically just saying there is a lot of physical play that you don't realize, and that there is probably a foul on every single trip near every single trip near the basket probably has fouls you're just not seeing that aren't getting called.
Yeah, and it's great that you bring up the WWE because when I look at that play with Dellavedova and Horford, Dellavedova looks just like a professional wrestler who was thrown into the ropes and he's bouncing back. He's like, I have no control over my body. Oh my God, I cannot help myself. Oh, it's like, dude, you could have stopped at any point, but you just kept moving because you didn't. I mean, I think he wasn't trying to hurt Al Horford. I think what he was trying to do is he was trying to flop and like get a call or something, right? And he, it just kind of kept going. And Horford was like not having any of it. He's like trying to move out of the way. And so Dellavedova was like, oh, I was trying to flop that way. Oh shit, I'll try to flop this way. And like eventually it just kind of collapses. But it's just kind of a ridiculous play. It's just not the way. Like, if you and I were standing like that and we got shoved a certain way and we were losing our balance, that's not the way we would, like, recover our balance, right? We would, like, probably put a hand down on the floor or move our foot in another way or even roll. We wouldn't just kind of, like, take 8 steps backwards, like, flailing the whole time like I'm falling off the side of a cliff and I can't keep my balance.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, you said wrestling, and that's true. Yeah, you watch wrestling, and the good wrestlers are the ones that can sell. You're like, oh yeah, your body wouldn't move. Like, no one would ever respond to getting hit by, like, falling 10 feet back, hitting some ropes, doing a flip, and coming back. That wouldn't happen, but that's how they have to sell it. I don't really have a good segue into LeBron.
Oh, James. Can I get just one thing on here, Dre? Sorry. So, I have to defend Kevin Love a little bit here. I've been reading 2 things about the Cavaliers over the last few days leading up to the finals. One is that they're better off without Love because Tristan Thompson is playing really well. That's absurd. They could just play them both at the same time. Like, why can't they play them on the court? They're 2 great big men. That'd be a great front court. So that's one reason why it's absurd. But another is that, he was taken out by a dirty play, right? You're saying it's his fault that Olynyk tore his labrum? I don't see how you blame that on Kevin Love. I can't blame him at all.
I don't. Yeah, well, I don't know. I think I had no real. I guess this is kind of a nice segue. So Kevin Love's out, dirty play. We'll get to LeBron James. He did just announce he's probably going to come back with the Cavs. That's probably not a good sign,
really?
to be honest. that probably means either one, he's just playing nice for politics, so who knows what happens, or two, his injury's not fantastic. He didn't get a good diagnosis, so basically he doesn't have a choice.
He was also re-injured in the celebration of the last series.
Are you serious?
Dead serious. What an unnamed teammate apparently hit him while celebrating.
Oh, jeez. All right. Well,
That's one of those like rumor articles, but it was written today.
Wow.
okay, so on that, let's actually talk LeBron. So one of the things about LeBron is, and I've got this in the notes, I think he's the most impressive player in NBA history. I think he, we were talking, I think last week about the Mount Rushmore of greats, and I think him and maybe Magic Johnson do lay claim to being the most impressive player ever. It's kind of hard. I can go both ways, but just what he's done in the modern NBA is ridiculous. And so a lot of ESPN stats stuff has come up on this lately, which is great, which is LeBron James is going to hit 700 minutes in 5 consecutive playoff series, which is something that has not happened since Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Dennis Johnson did it back with the Celtics in the late 80s. And by the way, one of the reasons this hasn't happened a lot in NBA history is back in the 60s, the 60s Celtics don't count. I'm sorry, because the league was much smaller. The playoffs were much shorter. Even up until the mid 80s, the top seed used to get a bye in the first round. Don't forget, until the early 2000s, the first round only went to a best of 5. So basically, LeBron James has existed in an NBA that has required more wear and tear from top teams than ever in NBA history. And in that time has managed to go to 5 consecutive NBA finals, which is a feat no player in the modern NBA, if we talk, the 3-point era, the shot clock era, the 3-point era, the ABA era, the international era, if you talk, the influx of all these international players, no player's done it. Magic didn't do it. Michael didn't do it. It's freaking ridiculous. And the other thing to just consider that, last week, like I said, double ear infection, didn't get to writing as much. But the research I started doing at the beginning of the week when I still thought I was going to have my sanity for the full week was about LeBron James. And it is just ridiculous the amount of wear and tear he's put on his body. For reference, Andre Miller, who's one of my favorite players, is known as an Iron Man. And LeBron James almost has as many minutes, regular seasons and playoffs, as Vince Carter and Andre Miller. That is absurd. And he's doing it by age 30. So on the one hand, you look at LeBron James and you say he's only 30. He's still young. He's still got lots of good years in front of him. I'm actually a little interested, Patrick, particularly in your thoughts on how long can he keep going? Because no player in the history of the NBA, some people even brought up Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain notoriously played like every minute of every season, right, including overtime for his team one year, averaged over 48 minutes a game.
Yeah, that's the record that will never be broken, pretty much.
But he didn't start doing that until he was out of college, right? Because people don't realize it used to be the case, like football now, if you were an NBA player, you played all the way through college. It wasn't until Moses Malone where it was kind of like acceptable to come out. And that didn't even last long until KG. So for most of NBA history, you spent a good portion of time in college, and the college season is not as long, is not as grueling. The competition's not as fierce. So even comparing LeBron James to Wilt Chamberlain, by age 30, LeBron James, is played more minutes than even Wilt Chamberlain, who was playing, the most minutes per game of like any player in NBA history.
Yeah, I mean, again, as I said in the pre-show, a lot of this is because he goes so deep in the playoffs every single year, right? Not many players did that, and the ones who did, like one of the ones who did, like Michael Jordan, he took a couple of years off. And well, he took a couple of years off, and he started when he was like 21, not when he was 18. So it makes a big difference for him too. So I mean, when you look at, I think it is per game numbers, like he does play a lot of minutes, but I don't think it's too crazy. But he plays somewhere between 5 and 10 games more than most other star players, just because he goes so deep in the playoffs and per year. And then there's also the fact that he essentially, until this year, he was an Iron Man, right? I mean, this was the first year he was like, I think he was injured for about 3 weeks. And other than that, he just never has had any big injuries. He's been very blessed with his injury history.
Yeah, we've got his minutes up right now from Basketball Reference, and it's really impressive. So even despite those injuries, he still played 2,500 minutes this year, which, is not bad. he played over 3,000 minutes the first 6 years of his career, and it would have been the first 8, except he only played 2,966 minutes in 2009, 2010. That's a ton of minutes.
And if you're looking at those minutes, don't let 11-12 fool you. That was a lockout season. That was 66 games. He still played a ton of minutes that season.
But again, I want to reemphasize, I don't think he plays a crazy ton of minutes per game. I mean, he does, but not like, for example, Jimmy Butler led the league in minutes per game, right? It's just that he does not miss games. Historically, he doesn't have injuries of like 3-4 games in a row. Historically, he didn't miss games. So he was a star player playing like 30, 35 minutes a game, but every freaking game. Like no swollen ankles, no back spasms, no, torn ligaments in the thumb, like just no big injuries that held him out of any like significant stretches.
Yeah, and I mean, what's interesting to me just as a point is, we hear people say, will he bypass Jordan? I'm sorry, like just in my mind, one of the things broken record here, just keep bringing up on the show, like I don't think people realize that Jordan's second three-peat just unfortunately was not as impressive from an individual standpoint as people think. It's not to say Jordan wasn't great. It's not to say if you looked at all three of those years as a collective that Jordan probably wasn't the best player on the team and definitely the most versatile. He was one of the only scorers because Pippen started degrading too. But it is to say that second three-peat was more team-based than we would like to believe. It had a lot of Dennis Rodman helping out, Scottie Pippen stepping up. Their bench was ridiculously good. It had Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc. That second three-peat was more team-based than individual-based, and LeBron James has had the opposite. If we compare the caliber of team LeBron James has traditionally had to the caliber of team Michael Jordan traditionally had, it hasn't even been close. He's had some great players. Dwayne Wade is definitely up there, but it just hasn't been the same. So when you look at LeBron James on an individual basis and then how far he's gone in the playoffs, and then just, the impressiveness that he now has a stat in my mind that basically, it finally puts him in a place where you're not comparing to other players. He made it to 5 consecutive finals. No other player in the modern NBA has done that while being the best player on the team. I think, he's secured a spot in my mind as, the greatest modern NBA player. And I don't think there's anything outrageous about that.
Okay, I'm not necessarily going to disagree with you, but I'm going to throw something out there that's going to maybe be some food for thought. And that is when Jordan was winning all of his titles, the East was the dominant conference. Right? In the early 90s, the East was definitely the dominant conference. You had the Orlando Magic with Shaq. You had in the late 80s, like you still had the Detroit Pistons were still amazing. And the West was kind of like this.
By the way, just for our Knicks fans on the show, we got to give them a shout out. That was when the Knicks were relevant. The Knicks were actually good.
Yeah,
the
Knicks were really good. Those Van Gundy and those Pat Riley and then Van Gundy Knicks were really good. And then you had Pat Riley in first with the Knicks and then later with the Miami Heat, where they were really good teams. The morning teams there, like the East traditionally had 8 or 9 teams that looked really good, and the West kind of was like, the first 5 teams were pretty good, and then the rest kind of fell off, and then the West notoriously didn't play a lot of defense. The West had like the Trailblazers, some years the Lakers. It had the Jazz, traditionally being very good. And then after that, there was not a lot of depth. San Antonio was in there in the later part of the 90s, but that was kind of, that was like 94 and 5 on. I mean, the East was a lot stronger conference. So for Jordan to dominate in the stronger conference, that says something too. And I look at LeBron's career, like the East has never been strong during LeBron's career. Basically,
it did have some few flares, right? You had the Celtics briefly being something, but I
no. But what I'm saying, the conference as a whole, obviously there were top teams in the East, just like in the 90s there were top teams in the West. What I'm saying is that you didn't have this thing where like the 8th or the 10th best team in the conference was winning 45 games. you pretty much have not had that in the East during the entirety of LeBron's career, almost, right?
Yeah.
You look at the teams he beat to get there, to get to the finals. They are not as impressive as the teams that Jordan beat to get to the finals. I don't think.
All
I
right,
mean,
and so, by the way, Brian and I talked this a little last week, and just in general, I have like two types of arguments I consider. I say the Kobe versus MJ arguments in basketball arguments, which I consider ludicrous and stupid arguments, and I don't want to talk to the person who sides with Kobe. And then I have, the Kevin Garnett versus Tim Duncan arguments, where I have an opinion, but I can see both sides, right? And this is one of those where I may be coming out saying Team LeBron, I may get a LeBron shirt or whatever, but anybody that says Team Jordan or has points like you're saying, I've got no problem with. I'm not going to go home tonight and be like, oh my God, Patrick's so crazy. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I'm taking my stance. I don't have a problem with it, but at the same time, this is not a cut dry. LeBron James is definitively the best ever. I'm saying, in my mind, he is. This is a nice milestone to put him there. And that's my opinion, and I don't think it's outrageous.
but no, I don't. I think anyone who thinks he's not in the conversation is being fantastically stupid. But I mean,
I have a question for you guys about this. Is LeBron helped out by having a faster pace now? And was that true? Was the 90s pace a lot slower? And did Jordan get penalized for that?
I think that in general, pace favors players who do good things because, if you say every possession I'm going to do something good, well, the more possessions you get to do something good, the better your numbers are going to look, both on a per game and also on a per 48 minutes basis. So I think it kind of does benefit better players, right? A faster pace makes good players look better and makes bad players look worse, is my general philosophy on that. Having said that, I don't know that the difference is significant enough to
It's not. I just
demerit.
looked it up.
Oh, okay, good.
The average pace last, I think, 2013. I was trying to look up a good season for LeBron. Was about 92 possessions per 48 minutes in the NBA. The average pace in 96, when the second three-peat happened for the Bulls, 92 possessions per game per 48 minutes. And what I will say on pace just in general is we noticed that, right? Pace does matter a little, and there is a big difference. There's a difference between the top team in the league and the bottom team in the league. But if we look at the average pace, I think someone, Patrick, on Twitter asked us about doing like points over par for, instead of per 48 per pace. There's something to that, but at the same note, I think people do overrate the impact of pace because most teams do play close to the same pace. And even if it's not like in baseball, it would get you an extra 2 or 3 innings. It'll get you like an extra, maybe half an inning.
Well, and there's interaction effects too, right? I mean, and LeBron, by the way, through his career, he has not traditionally played on fast teams. He's not been like, even though he's actually murderous in the fast break, he's never been a part of a run and gun fast break team. I would actually be really curious to see like what he would play like in a D'Antoni offense or something like that, right? Because traditionally LeBron's teams get a little bit bogged down in the half court. And there was a year in Miami where Spo pushed the pace a little bit more than usual, but otherwise he's generally not been on fast paced teams. And he's kind of dominated in the half court game. But there's interaction effects because if you take a team that has a fast pace and scores a certain way, it's really hard to break apart. Well, do they score efficiently because of their fast pace and because their players are suited to the fast pace and their offensive system is suited to that pace, or would they have the same efficiency if they had a slower pace? I think there's a big open question there. So teasing apart like per position versus per 48 and saying that there aren't any interaction effects, I think that's disingenuous.
Yeah, I'd agree. All right, well, that's all I got for LeBron. I mean, it's not going to be. I don't think I'll shock anybody saying here that you'll probably get at least 1 or 2 more Warriors/LeBron love fest, regardless of how the finals plays out. But with we wanted to go kind of a shorter show, and we're right at about that, Patrick. So I'm ready to go to shout-outs if you've got any prepared.
I am woefully ill-prepared this week, and I do not have any shout-outs. Other than to all the Cleveland fans who think I'm an idiot because I said Dellavedova's dirty player. That's how I know I'm doing something right. I get a bunch of vitriol from, any random team stands, then that's how I know I must be saying something worthwhile.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll take it. Cleveland fans, you're going to get a shout out. It's probably the only one you're going to get in all of this finals, let's be honest. All right, you got anybody, Brian? I think you had one, Brian. Do you have more than that?
I do have a shout out. Do you want me to do the off-season teasers first, though, that we've got here in the notes? Or are we going to save it?
Out.
Okay.
They were on the show notes, but we're trying to go. There's no need to just have a filler part of the podcast. Keeping you in the loop, we had some topics that we were going to maybe talk about that saying we would put them off till talking about later. One of those, by the way, is Curry versus MJ. I may have drunk tweeted about this and then talked about it on the air, and the editor of the Boxscore Geeks may have had a talk, and we may have to talk about it in the offseason. So we'll keep that out there.
And FIFA, of course.
And FIFA. We'll probably talk FIFA in the offseason. Offseason's going to be long. We'll have plenty of non-basketball topics to talk then. So anyway, with that said, Brian.
Oh, yeah, my shout-out. So, unfortunately, I'm not the biggest comic guy. I wish I knew more. I'm a failed nerd in that area, but I do like Saturday morning breakfast cereal, and they have a great comic. Let me bring it up right now. This is an economics comic, and I guess I'll read it out for the audio listeners. There's two old guys sitting around, and one says, "Hey, do you know how we sit around every night grousing about the way nobody agrees with us how society works?" The other guy says, "Yep." The first guy says, "What if we mathematize that?" And the caption is, "Before economics." So thank you, economics, for helping us put math into our complaints.
Love it. All right, so mine is also going to similarly be a type of media. I finally got a chance to watch the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary titled Soul Man, which is about Sonny Vaccaro, who is just this notorious figure in terms of bringing Nike and then later Adidas sneakers to the colleges, to the high school players, to basically being one of the key figures in making the gigantic shoe empire that is now part of basketball. And just as a wrap up to that, Sonny Vaccaro figured out he had an in while he was working with Adidas to get LeBron James to sign with them. And what he said is, I'm going to offer him $100 million for his contract as a rookie, right? When he was coming to the league, he said, I want to offer him $100 million. And he says, I've got him, right? If I offer him a $100 million check, there's no way he can go to another brand. He had done something similar actually with Michael Jordan. When he went with Michael Jordan, he basically offered Michael Jordan his own shoe. And that's how, when Nike was this tiny brand competing, they were able to beat Converse, because they actually managed to wow Michael Jordan and make him feel special. He had the same plan with LeBron James, and Adidas decided to try and haggle, and instead of just offering the $100 million, offered $70 million plus incentives, and LeBron James ends up signing with Nike for $90 million. Rest is history. I thought that was an amazing documentary. There's a bunch of other stuff in there. The NCAA comes into play too, but fantastic documentary. Gets my shout out for the week. Must watch, and I can't believe a shoe company missed on LeBron James. It's over $30 million. It's almost up there with James Harden's stupidity. All right, so now that being said, and by the way, it would be $30 million over like 5 or 6 years. So, it's exactly the same as James Harden, like over 4 or 5 million a year. All right, so with that said, that is our show. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher as the Boxscore Geeks Show. Make sure to do that. I guess we're on Twitch now, Brian. So the Twitch is twitch.tv/nerd numbers. You keep up on that. You got it. Monday nights at around 9:30 p.m. Eastern is when we plan to try and do this, when there are not Warriors games on. That's the one thing you'll have to look for. Warriors playoff games. Regular season, Brian, we're not going to give you that out. You can find us on YouTube as well. We put, after we're done recording, we put the shows up. It's channel Nerd Numbers. There's the Boxscore Geeks playlist. And if for whatever reason you happen to find the show not through our site originally, it's boxscoregeeks.com. So go to all those things, rate us, upvote us, tweet us, whatever really helps us out. We really appreciate it. And if you do all that, you might even see some of the stuff you talk about show up next week. And with that, we will see you next week.